Okay, so we're here with Yaritza Ruiz of Absolutely Clear Title. And Yaritza, I just want to kind of do an intro of who you are, how
Okay.
you got into title, how long you've been into title, and
Okay.
talk really a little bit about title just generally, and then we can get into, your talking points and your lesson plan and so on and so forth. So
Okay, cool.
without further ado, this is Yaritza. How she got to me is she is a member of a BNI group, along with an old friend of mine by the name of Amy Stillwagon, who is a real dynamo of an entrepreneur up in Newburgh area in the printing and marketing area, physical marketing materials. And Amy just randomly reached out to me and said, "Hey, I want to connect you with Yaritza." And I'm like, "Oh, perfect. We haven't had any educational discussions about title in a long time. So this is a real value add for all of us here in the industry, just to, sharpen the saw, so to speak, right? To make sure that we really are up to speed in what's going on. So welcome. I'll let you go ahead and speak.
Well, thank you, Jeff. So I will definitely introduce myself first, and then I'll share my screen. I have a few slides
Great.
that I'll get to. So thank you again for this opportunity. My name is Yaritza, and I am originally a Bronx native, and I am in the Hudson Valley about 7 years now. My background is originally as a paralegal. Right out of college, my last year of college, I took a few electives, and I then thought that I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I jumped into being a paralegal, and my first gig was as a real estate paralegal. So I learned a lot of the transactional portion of the buyer-seller contract type of situation. After a few years of doing that, I transitioned into doing banking. So for about 6-7 years, I was a banking paralegal. So I was that one that cleared, like, back then it was called HUDs, now it's called CDs, but working closely with loan originators, processors, those people getting everything clear to close on that portion. And I started doing closing.
What is CDs? Explain that.
CDs are closing disclosures.
Right.
So those are the documents that are provided by lenders that gives your buyers an overall of what their closing costs are.
Right.
And as a banking paralegal, so the paralegal that assists the bank attorney in the transaction, that was my position. And as a result of that, I started actually doing physical closing. So I would be that person at the closing representing the lender. And then I transitioned into doing title closings just with my familiarity with the process and what it means to clear the title and mark up title. These are all sort of title insurance jargon. After a few years of working for lawyers, I needed a little bit of a shift and more of a work-home balance. So I applied for a position at a title company, and I started really at the bottom there doing typing and learning what it meant to produce a title report. And from there, I started learning so much about the investigative portion of title insurance, which was super fun for me. And I learned the ins and outs of what it means to produce a title report, what it meant to clear a title report, and ultimately get you the clear to close that you needed. And that includes everything that you know at a closing table. So verifying liens, judgments, mortgages, making sure that all the documents are properly executed for recording. That was my passion. That I gained while working at the title company. But what I noticed was that I wasn't seeing the customer service and the educational portion that would simplify things for people, which is what led me to opening Absolutely Clear Title. And that's really what I've been doing these last 2 years, is just building and educating on this least understood portion of the business.
Well, what's interesting to me is that you really started from the ground up, your experiences on the real estate side and banking side as a paralegal set you in perfect motion to do title, because you're either there at the closing table or prepping all the docs for the closing. So exactly what the title closer is going to need to get the deal done.
Exactly.
So it was a perfect fit. So good move. That was smart.
Thank you. Yeah, I sort of feel like I was put in certain paths for certain reasons. So I'll share that in the transition of me wanting to open my own company, I did not have a lot of exposure to like foreclosure properties. right? But sometimes things happen for a reason. And I actually connected with a title company out in Long Island, and they handle a lot of foreclosure and short sale transactions. And that exposure just put me into the path of learning even more. So I always feel like it was like baby steps to where I am today. So thank
Okay,
you.
great, great. So let's, does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns at this point for Yaritza and her history and how she came along? Do you have any questions relating to that? I don't see any hands going up or mics being opened. So I'm going to take that as a no from everybody. So let's keep moving along, Yaritza. You can go ahead and open up your slide deck and share and all that.
All righty. Thank you. All right, let me get to my slides, slideshow. All right, so can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right, great. All right, so everyone, thank you again for attending today's educational meeting. Today's topic is going to be title insurance, preparation and communication equals a clear title. And the basis of this is really to give you as agents tools to help you build your team for success. And the only way that you can build your team for success is through preparation and communication. So I'll dive right in, and please be sure to have your questions at the end. If you want to throw in a question in the chat, I will be sure to get to it.
And Yaritza, I just want to make one thing real clear to everybody, and you can agree or not. At the end of the day, no closing happens, whether it's cash or mortgage, without clear title, correct?
Correct.
All right. So
Correct.
for everybody that's a new licensee here listening in and not really fully understanding the real estate process, just know that at the end of the day, clear title is what it's all about.
Yes. So we are essentially the gatekeepers of the closings. So the lender relies on us to give them the go ahead for clear title. Most buyers, attorneys rely on us to disclose everything that's needed in order to get a clear title. So at the end of the day, we are mostly, if you're new to the business, you'll hear that title companies are a lot of the scapegoats in the delays, because ultimately, as I said, we are the gatekeeper. We give the yay, even if the bank is ready to go. So I introduced myself already, but just to reiterate, when I did get a taste of real estate, I fell in love with it. There's so much to learn about real estate. Every transaction is so different, and they may mirror each other in some aspects, but every single transaction is individual and unique. And because of that, I grew a great passion for what I do. And that's why I really take joy in educating. So thank you again for that. All right, so I'm going to jump right into my topics. And the first thing that I think is important to understand is the history and the importance of title insurance and the role that the title companies play throughout the transaction. So the history is that about 150 years ago, a little over, the world of real estate changed dramatically because of a ruling that took place in Pennsylvania. There was a buyer by the name of Watson, and Watson purchased a house. His seller initiated reports and searches that then showed that he had some judgments on him. And the story goes that he actually took the advice of an attorney. I don't know how true that is, but supposedly he took the advice of an attorney, said, oh, you don't have to disclose that stuff, just sell it. And when Watson found out, he sued. And the court found that as a buyer, he was the one actually responsible for making sure that he was receiving clear title and that his seller was not negligent in disclosing and not disclosing the information. So this is what ultimately pivoted the title insurance world into existence. And shortly after that, there was a policy issued, and the first title insurance company was formed in the 1970s. And the basis of this was providing buyers.
Is that, you said 1970s, but do you mean 1870s?
I mean 1870s. Yes, that's what I meant.
Okay. This is like fascinating for me, that these dates. I'm a history buff, so this is really interesting.
Yeah. So in 1871 was the first actual policy that was issued, and then the agency ended up developing out of a group of attorneys that were in the real estate business already, and they actually called them conveyors back then. Conveyancers. So it was really interesting. And the ultimate basis behind it was to have someone or an agency fall back on if there was an issue. if there was a claim, that it removes the legal and financial responsibility of the buyer, which would have been Watson in this situation.
Now, hang on, before are
Yeah.
you gonna, sorry, go ahead, finish. Just
No,
don't,
you go
when
ahead.
you're done here talking, I just want to point a couple things out, historically speaking.
Okay. Well, no, go ahead. So, because I was going to jump into the role that title insurance companies now play.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
So what's interesting about these dates, right, is the Civil War ended in 1865, right? So our country was in total turmoil right before this ruling in Pennsylvania. And this is just like the greatness of America, you know, like how fast this country and the capitalist system that it has was able to respond, and the courts were able to function, and just amazing, right? Like that there was such organization ready to move forward, and commerce ready to happen at such a quick turnaround from the Civil War. I mean, can you imagine? Like, I was just listening actually to a historical account when the Civil War was happening, and Lincoln basically had to shut down the courts for a period of time. Everything was just totally upside down, you know? So it's just fascinating to me that like within just a relatively short amount of time, courts were functioning again. You know, within 5 years of the end of the Civil War, there's a title company birth. Like that's America. That is the power of America. It's awesome, you know? So I'm sorry.
It is. No, it is. And even more amazing is that, much like what you just said, they jumped on it so fast after this ruling that immediately, almost after this ruling, there was an act that was passed that allowed the incorporation of title companies. So there actually had to, the first step was allowing these type of agencies and companies to even exist. So,
and then liability protection beyond that, because they quick figured that out, you know? So that's cool. That's cool.
Yep. So, and that basis of title insurance has not changed, which is what is great about it, because people have the understanding that it's a one-time payment and it covers you financially and legally. So the role that a title company plays is to make representations, ultimately, right? The title company has access and assesses the possible risks that come from future claims. So the biggest difference between insurance as we know it, like home insurance, car insurance, is that these insurances protect you from future occurrences. So is my house going to be on fire? Will I get into a car accident? These are all future occurrences that your insurances that you understand and have in place now differ from title insurance. Title insurance protects you from past events and anything that may occur in the past that can come up to jeopardize your future ownership or usage of that, which I'll touch on a little bit more later, is what's protected under your title insurance company. And that's the role that they play throughout the transaction. We make representations and we defend when the risks and claims do come up.
Here's an important thing just to kind of parlay off what you just said. Right now, there's a lot of cash deals happening because the market is so intense. And I was just talking with one of our agents the other day that was hearing that parents of first-time home buyers are liquidating retirement funds to give their kids enough cash to just buy the house and then the refinancing. But, you know, I'm sure pretty much everybody who's using an attorney is ending up with a title insurance policy. But if by chance your clients are not, it's really important to have title insurance, you know?
Yes.
Just make sure.
It's actually, I'm glad that you said that. I'm glad that you said that because in New York State, an owner's policy is actually not required. So you may come across some sort of education that says, well, this is not required. However, it's just highly advised because of all of the risks that come along with not knowing the history of that property. So it's more of just letting people know that it's just in your best interest.
Definitely.
Right. So that brings me to helping you as agents understand what is the life of a title report. Most people don't understand because the word title is just an umbrella term and all of these things fall under this word title. So it's good, and it means different things for different parties, depending on which side of the transaction you stand on, right? So I wanted to take you through what is the life of a title report from ordering to recording for a buyer, okay? So this little flyer that I have here on the screen is a flyer that I give out when I'm speaking to first-time home buyers and gives them sort of an insight on the step-by-steps. So the first thing that will trigger a search of a property would be being contacted, the company being contacted by either an attorney or the buyer themselves that would initiate a 40 to 60-year search. Title companies are required to go back a minimum of 40 to 60 years, depending on the history, to give us a full insight on all of the transfers of that property and all of the mortgages ever placed on the property, liens, judgments, was everything properly taken off. And that's what triggers that. That turnaround time, depending on the county that you're in, will take about 7 to 10 days. One of the biggest items that are known in title insurance to cause delays is what's called municipal searches. These searches consist of certificates of occupancy, which gives you the legal occupancy in that town of that property. Another item that might be reflected in the municipal searches are things like housing violations. So if a recent one that I saw was due to COVID, a lot of people or restaurants had like outdoor seating. And if they didn't have that outdoor seating out there properly done, then they would get a violation. That violation can then tack onto the property, and then there's a monetary amount due to the town. So these are all little things that may come up on your report that can hinder or end up being a cost to your ultimate buyer. And these actually, when I made this flyer, I guess was about 3 weeks out, but now depending on the county can be 4 to 6 weeks. So the sooner you get those ordered, the better in avoidance of delay. Once the title company receives all of what we call the raw material, the other term of it is called an abstract, which is the history of the property, we do what's called an analysis. And it's called reading is another term. And what we do is that we analyze and scrutinize the mortgages, the deeds, the property lines, any possible liens or judgments, and we verify that to ensure that there is a list of items that need to be addressed in order for us to issue a clear to close. All right. This research is called clearing clouds. And the reason why is because anything that can hinder your usage or ownership is considered a cloud for you. So anything that's like hindering you ultimately. Once that analysis is done, we move on to the production of what everyone understands to be a title report. So this title report is transferred over to a typist who then compiles the whole report together, and it gives you the step-by-steps. You'll see certain what's called schedules in there, certifications of who's the actual owner of the property. What items do we need in order to clear this to close? What are the mortgages that are outstanding that need to be addressed in order to close? So these are all items that the title company should be providing to all parties so that everyone is in communication. And the best thing that you can do during this portion of it is ask questions, because ultimately it leads to teamwork. Title company provides one section, attorneys provide another. The hats that the buyer attorney wears and the seller attorney wears is very different when it comes to clearing. So the best thing that can be done is everyone working together as a team, understanding what their roles are, and opening communication. Without the communication, you'll have, much like the experience that I have, you'll have the agent calling the buyer's attorney, hey, what's going on? Oh, let me get back to the title company and find out. Title company, oh, this person's not in. And you sort of have like this circle of miscommunication, and ultimately the buyer is the one lost in the whole transaction. So it's very important to keep the communication open. Which then, if all communication is done properly, your closing day should be the smoothest day of your transaction. And if you're experienced, then you know that there has been many stories of horrible closings, horrible experiences sitting there for 4 or 5 hours. However, it really should be the smoothest portion of the transaction. Everyone should go there, know their roles, know exactly what needs to be done. The hardest part for a closing is getting all those loan documents signed if there is a loan involved. And that's really what compiles or what the closing day consists of. The title closer at the closing, for your buyers to understand, is the person who sits there and is really the gatekeeper of the closing. We verify that all the charges are properly collected, that everything is properly executed, that the deed has the correct spelling, that it references the right property. So it's a lot of checks and balances when it comes to being at the closing for the title closer. So they really played the most important role at the closing table. And it's really important for you to understand that so that you know that they're not just a warm body. You know, they have a lot of roles post-closing as well. And one of the main things that I like to point out to buyers is that when you leave your table, whether you're an investor or this is your personal property that you plan to live in and reside in, it is important to take and keep your owner's policy. At every closing, if you're purchasing a title insurance policy, you will receive what's called an owner's policy. This owner's policy is going to help your buyer if they ever go to sell or if they ever go to refinance. It's going to be a good piggyback for the title company that's going to insure their next transaction, whether it's to borrow more money, as I said, or if they go to sell. This is very important if they ever have a claim that comes up. So if anyone ever knocks on your buyer's door and says, hey, you know, John Smith owned this, but I'm his wife and I owned it with him at the time and he sold it without my permission, they would use that policy to then initiate a claim with the title company, and that will protect them legally and monetarily. So my advice is always to do a dual security and save this policy in a safe, scan it in, leave it in your drive. It's very important to their ownership. So that covers my title insurance 101 for buyers. Very important for them to walk away from their closing with a copy of their deed, their owner's policy, and of course their keys. And then, you know, we love to say congratulations to buyers. Good investment, right?
Quite the process, right?
Exactly, exactly. Do I have any questions about that portion, the buyer's portion, before I move on to my next section?
I'm looking over participants. I do have some questions, but I want to see if anybody else is going to chime in here. I don't see any mics opening or hands raised. Okay, so I'll ask that one later. I guess my question is, the first one is, how has the speed of processing improved? I have to imagine that it's better now than it was a year ago, because you guys were dealing with COVID restrictions as well as an overheated market. And I feel like, I know from a number standpoint, the market is slowing, but only because there's just no inventory. So I have to think that processing is getting better. Is that true? Or like, are you seeing things come back to you guys faster or no?
That really comes down to where you're located and where the property is located. So there are certain towns that I am noticing now that municipal searches are definitely coming back within 2 weeks rather than 4. However, there are still some towns that have a skeleton crew and only one person. There are also some courts that are still limited. So a lot of our third-party examiners that actually go to the court physically to pull these old records, they have to schedule an appointment. But those appointments are starting to open up now that COVID is, I guess, almost over. I don't really know. So slowly, and you only notice it in certain towns.
But it's not getting worse, it's getting better.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's definitely getting better, yeah.
That's a good thing. And then
I think the only place that's still bad is Newburgh. The city of Newburgh is still kind of slow.
Yeah, well, staffing is a problem, you know.
Exactly.
Still difficult to get people back to work. So
exactly. I think
the next question I had, it just like dawned on me when you were talking about, you know, the seller's wife knocking on the door and saying, hey, he sold without me, right? I guess my question is, like, in that scenario, is it possible for somebody to actually take title back, and then the insurance policy, the only thing that they can do is just pay the new owner money? Like, does that happen?
It can.
Really?
And that's what will protect. So that's what the title policy actually protects against. So let's say that this wife actually has a valid claim. It is up to the title company to do that investigative work and see if it's a valid claim. And if they did have a valid claim that the title company missed in the process of clearing that file property to close, then it is, well, it's the responsibility of the title company or their underwriter to make the buyer whole. So they
Right,
would
right.
actually be provided with the amount of money that they paid for the property at the time. So that's what would cover them. So if the claim is valid, and let's say they bought the property for 250,000, they would be getting 250,000 to make them whole again.
But that's it. All they're gonna get is the value of the property. I mean, they're gonna get booted from their home. I mean, that's unbelievable, you know?
Or it could be the other way, where the
Right,
seller, the person claiming interest will then have to be
right,
paid
right. Which
whatever
is the
they're
more
owed.
likely scenario, because who's gonna want to take the
Correct.
property back? But, you know,
They want money.
yeah, right, they want money. But what if like, 10 years goes by and the value of the property's tripled? Is this title insurance company gonna pay current market value?
Well, that would be an additional coverage at closing called a market value rider. It's about
Ah,
10% more. It's about 10% more of the premium that they pay. They would pay an additional 10% in order to cover them if a claim were to come up,
interesting.
even,
Down the
yeah,
road.
even after 20 years. Mhm.
Do most people get the market value rider or no?
No, most people don't. And really,
Wow.
it's not even really highly recommended unless you have a situation much like what I described. So if there's a situation where there's a missing heir, or it's coming out of an estate or out of a foreclosure or a short sale situation, or if the last deed of record was like from 1950 and the possibility that there may be some missing heir that's not found, those are scenarios in which you may want to, for a 1 to 4 family, it has to be a residential, owner occupied. That's where the market value would apply. There is
Mhm.
another coverage. There is another insurance policy that's called a TOEP, which is a TOEPP policy, which covers owners for situations and risks that may come in the future. And it has already embedded in it in what's called a market value rider, which is what I just described. And it also gives the buyer a little bit more coverages for any future claims from, like, let's say, neighbor disputes and stuff like that. So
Okay, cool.
a lot
We
of
do have
possibility.
a question that was just chatted in by Terry Gavin. She says, Yaritza, and this is a good question, from a long time, very smart broker, Terry Gavin. Yaritza, have you experienced many incidents recently of home title fraud? Is this a serious issue as of late? And if you're going to cover this later in the presentation, we can get to it later.
Fraud as far as like someone pulling your deed and reconveying your
Yeah,
deed.
like you hear all these, I think there's a thing that's called title lock, and they're
Yep.
like you hear it on the news, or not the news, but there's ads running all over the place about people basically stealing title of homes from people. Is that
Correct.
legit?
Well, it is legit because it really doesn't take rocket science to file a deed of record. You may be able to find a template and then go through the steps of recording it with the county. And in New York State, at least, we are a first to record state. So if I file my deed before yours, too bad for you, right?
Mhm.
However, your title insurance policy does cover you against this. And there are services like the TOEP policy that I mentioned that will then protect you. So you don't have to pay a monthly fee if your buyers are concerned with this possibility of fraud. They can always purchase an additional coverage through their title insurance that would cover them legally and monetarily, which is something that's recommended, because if that fraud were to happen, they don't have to go through what's called a quiet title, which can cost them about $10,000. But if they had the TOEP policy, the title company will handle all of that for them.
So, but I was under the impression that the title company is only going to handle things in the past, not in the future.
Right. So that is what your basic standard title insurance policy covers, past events. But there are coverages that can be added to it, much like
I.e. the
riders that
TOEP.
are added. Yep, like the TOEP
Right.
or the market
Okay.
value that can be
Okay.
added to your policy. Yep.
So then how do we, all of us who own homes, to check our title insurance policies for all the different properties that we own collectively? How do we know if we have that coverage?
Well, taupe is really sort of like a new phenomenon that's been going around. A lot of people have not talked about it. And now with the increase in fraud, it's been something that the title industry has been speaking a lot about. If you are not sure what coverages you have, look at your deed, the deed that transfer the property into your name, and see if the title company that insured you at that time is listed on there. You can always go back to that title company or the underwriter for that title company and request a copy of your policy. And it should have all of the endorsements that show you what your coverages are.
All right, so walk me back through that. So if someone's going to spend time to go through their documents to ensure that they're up to snuff, they would want to find their deed, right?
Yep, your
And
deed
they would want to
or
find their title insurance policy.
owner's policy. Yep. Typically,
And but they would also additionally want to make sure that the title insurance company that's holding the policy is named on the deed. Is that what you just said?
No, I meant like sometimes the title company is referenced on the deed as the company that handled the recording of that deed.
Yeah.
And that will give you just a contact on who to go back to.
Oh, okay. But if you find your title insurance policy, obviously you have everything you need.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Like recently I had someone reach out to me who told me that their mother didn't have any title insurance. And I was like, well, when did they purchase? And did they have a loan at the time? And I was pretty confident that they did have a policy. They just didn't have their copy. So I ended up pulling the record, finding their last deed of record, and then ultimately contacting the title company and getting their copy. So it can be just that simple. I mean, you can always reach out to, if you know the name of the company that helped you, then you can reach out to them and, or tell another agency like, hey, can you pull my deed? And they can do sort of that due diligence for you and pull it.
So the bottom line, coming back to Terry's question, is that this title fraud is real. It is possible for somebody to actually steal title of the property. And
Much
it's
easier
happening.
in New York. It does happen. It does happen a lot. A lot in the city. A lot in the city. It happens in the city. It happens, from what I've seen, it happens a lot in New York City and like Long Island, where, and I think it's just more so that it's just so easy to record a deed. You know, there's a lot of third-party companies that will just do it. You don't even have to do it right a lot of the time. But there are coverages that can help buyers prevent it. You know, the thing is that a lot of these companies, like the title lock, they have the same access like your title company. You know, they are monitoring was something last recorded. Let's look at it, you know. And those possibilities and availabilities are all things that title companies can do as well. They all have access to that.
But how does it, I mean, if you don't ultimately sign over your deed, how is it possible for them to take title to the property?
Well, because a lot of deeds are public records. So someone can just see your signature.
And forge it?
Yes.
Okay. But don't they need a notary at least?
Well, I mean, it's pretty easy to find crooked notaries out here.
Oh,
The
okay.
biggest thing is your social. You see, that's an item that they need in order to convey the premises. They need a social. So if they had gone already through the steps of stealing your identity, that's what they would need first.
Interesting. So if they can get your social, they can get a crooked notary, they can steal your house.
They can actually just give you a really big headache. It's really not them stealing your home. It's them putting on record that they now own it. And then it then opens up that process of you now having to
deal with it. And it's just easier to pay them to get rid of them. Yeah. Right. So they're not actually taking possession of the properties. They're just holding people up.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Let's continue. We're down to, we've got about 23 minutes left till the top of the hour. So I always try to be respectful. All right. Sounds good.
I will talk fast. All right. So the next section that I wanted to touch on are delays, and are they avoidable? And I think the biggest PSA that I can give to agents is that in order for you to avoid delays, you have to ask questions. So that's why I put this little picture here. You should know the what, where, when, who, why, and how of your transaction. I truly believe that realtors are the first point of contact for most people in transactions, and you should really be the person that's involved all the way through. It should not be that once you secured your offer, you hand it over to the buyers and call me at closing. Shouldn't be that way, because your buyer ultimately, or even your seller, is still very dependent on you being their guide. So in order for you to guide them properly, you have to know everything. You have to ask all the right questions and don't be afraid to ask questions. And that is where you would mainly avoid delays, which then brings me to my seller's agents, right? Because this is where it's very important. I think in New York State, even in New Jersey, it's sort of buyer driven because the buyer pays for everything, but the seller is the one that's really responsible for clearing the title at the end of the day.
Right.
So yeah, so how can sellers prepare? How can you prepare your sellers, and what is their responsibility? At the end of the day, they own it, so they have to clear it, right? So some points that I want you to keep in mind when you're preparing your seller, whether they have their property on the market yet or not, is what do they need? What do they have to be aware of? Their title report is going to disclose items that need to be addressed, right? And that's going to be any possible liens against them, judgments, and anything that even they have paid and should be clear of record is important to know. So pertinent documents that your sellers in your preparation to getting them ready to sell their property, what do they need? If they have a copy of their owner's policy from when they purchased, fantabulous. Really, really important for them to have this. It will make life so much easier for their buyers, right? If they have an existing survey, that is really going to help their buyer not only save money, but also the title company will be able to verify those property lines accurately, right? Another item that they have to be ready to provide is a copy of their payoff statement or their mortgage statement. This will then allow the title company and their attorneys to request payoffs to get these mortgages properly removed of record. Something that's important to keep in mind, your seller may have refinanced their home a few years ago, and that mortgage still appears open of record. If they have any proof of any payments that they made, whether it's a judgment or a mortgage, it's good for them to have that handy just in case, because things happen. And one of the biggest delays in title insurance is the mortgages that are still outstanding that shouldn't be. All right, so that includes even liens. I've had situations where people think that they've paid off a judgment that was filed with the county and it still appears open and it's an issue. I had one person claim that they didn't owe $17,000 to Toyota. Totally forgot they bought the car, and at closing, it had to get paid. So definitely be conscious of the fact that your seller's responsibility is much more than just making sure the house looks good to sell. All right.
I want to just interject here real quick. This is a promotion for our lead conversion questionnaire that I have. I just want to point out to everybody that question number 15 on the seller column on the lead conversion questionnaire states as follows. It would be extremely helpful if you have a copy of your deed, tax bill, survey, title insurance, and any other information that you may have on the property. Right? So that's a question that or a statement that we want to make to a seller before we go in and meet with them for a few reasons. Number one, there's a real reason why we're asking the question, right? Yaritza, you just stated it. Those are really helpful documents to the people that ultimately need to get clear title on the property so that you can close. And the reason why we want to mention that to them before we even meet with them to talk about listing their properties, because we want to get them thinking about these documents. A lot of people, they're not going to be able to get it in 2 minutes. You know, like they're going to have to think about where it was. They're going to have to start looking around. So we're planting a seed in their head to start looking for these things. That's just good business. So if you didn't know this and you don't know what I'm talking about, please come to lead conversion training, or at least just watch lead conversion training on Google Drive. All right, keep going here. Sorry.
Awesome. All right. Another item that the seller has to be conscious of is if the buyer or their lender is requiring municipal searches, which I touched on earlier, it is their responsibility to, at least in a lot of towns in New York currently, to request an inspection. So what I advise at least my Hudson Valley realtors is have what's called a smoke detector affidavit. You guys may be familiar with the standard one, which they just sign at the bottom. There's another one that needs to be notarized. This document is very important and will absolutely avoid delays for the title company, because this, what we call an SDA, needs to be notarized, submitted to the town, and then the seller has to call to request an inspection so that the municipals can be generated. So it's a couple of steps that can really cause a delay. if it's not done earlier on. And if those municipals show open permits or violations, it's up to the seller and their responsibility to clear it.
Yeah, to remedy it.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
yeah, ultimately the buyer can say, you know what, I'll take it as is, which I see a lot now, especially with these cash deals. People are planning to make renovations and pull other permits and change things with the premises. So it really is on a deal by deal basis.
Yaritza, real quick, I just want to say to you, I don't want to push you to rush through this. This is all really important stuff. We can absolutely do a part 2 of this in another couple of weeks or whenever. So take your time. Let's get through what we can get through and we can come back to it, you know?
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Yes. Another item that I think is important for your sellers to understand is, what are they going to be paying at closing? Most sellers are just looking at that bottom line. What am I going to get? So an itemization of the things that they will be paying will consist of course, your real estate commission, any attorney fees, transfer documents, fees to prepare those transfer documents, because it is the seller's attorney or the seller's responsibility to prepare the deed and the transfer forms that support that deed to convey the property. There are also what's called title closer or pickup fees, which are associated with paying off their mortgage or liens, and any escrow service charges or collection of escrows for possible taxes, water, or liens that need to be removed or paid of record. So you can also speak to your title insurance company and find out what is it that needs to be done. Get that itemization from them. Another item that I think is important for your sellers to understand is that what's the difference between a cash and a mortgage buyer? Really, in my opinion, there are not that many differences, because from a title insurance perspective, we handle it the same way. We want to make sure that things are cleared. So from a lending perspective, it may be a little different, but as I said before, the title company is the gatekeeper. So we are the ultimate yay or nay when it comes to closing. And in order to simplify the process, just make sure that your buyer is well prepared, that they have their valid ID at closing. You'd be surprised how many times I go to closings and they have expired IDs or IDs with no picture. Very important that they have that handy. And any other items that they've agreed to in the contract that they make sure that they have at that closing. All right, and that really sums up what a seller would need for the most part. Once again, I want to stress, just ask questions and be as participant in it as you possibly can in helping simplify your client experience. So actually, I didn't do a huge, long presentation, so this actually wraps it up for me. My PSA for all the agents is really to simplify your client experience. And the only way that you can do that is by setting yourself apart, by attending these events, educating yourself, making sure that you know every single portion of the process. And I would love to end this with a quote that says, if you're going to be truly successful, then set yourself apart from everyone else. Go beyond the limits of what classifies the average person and be exceptional. And I thank you. Thank you.
Bravo, really good job. That was excellent. We needed that.
Thank you.
I have a question from Pip Klein. She asked, would you be able to share your flyers with her and everybody else so that they can hand them around?
Absolutely, will do and would love to. I wanted to also let any agents on the call that are from Jersey or do Jersey work primarily, that I have a great collaboration with a New Jersey a New Jersey title company, and currently they were supposed to be on the line with me, but they are in Florida doing what Jeff is doing out there. So they're getting all their marketing stuff up and running for their company, but I rely on Bob Mangino greatly when it comes to my New Jersey contacts. So if I do have any New Jersey people on the line, I can definitely connect you and help bring clarity to that portion of it.
Okay. All right, great. I do. So if anybody has any questions, they just want to, raise your hand here in Zoom, we can call on you, or if you want to just open your mic and ask. I do have a couple more questions since we have a couple minutes here. Cool. So, and I'm not seeing anybody open the mic. So my question to you is, so at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about how we used to deal with the HUD-1, right? And then we switched over to the CD, the closing disclosure. And it used to be a lot easier to get the HUD-1. The closing disclosures seem to be this coveted document that no one wants to give to a realtor. Why is that?
So the CDs now are a lot more detailed, and they
Right.
have a lot more information on them. Like they went from like 2 pages to about 5 pages.
Right.
And I really think that's mainly what it is. It
That's
just
the
has
reason
more
why.
information on there,
Yeah.
more, I
Okay.
guess, private,
Yeah, it was
information.
a difficult transition period, right? Because like when you're doing referrals to other agencies around the country, like the standard was, well, you include a copy of the HUD-1 so
Mhm.
that they can be assured that they got every penny that was supposed to come to them. And then it was switched over to CDs, and it was like you couldn't get them, and you're asking for them, and it was like the wheels were grinding. But now everybody's just kind of resigned to the fact that you ain't getting the CD, so just forget about it. You gotta hope for the best.
You can. I mean, I've been to closings where people still give a copy of it, or at least a closing statement of some form. But I also, in full disclosure, they don't disclose everything. They don't
Uh-huh.
have your attorney fees on there. So there are certain items that are paid outside of closing that are not on there. That is
Hmm.
just, it's really for the bank so that they
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
reconcile their numbers.
Yeah.
So
So one other question that I have, hold on, we got a chat coming in here. Okay, Tiffany Megna said, wow, what a positive vibe person you are. Thanks for a great meeting. That was just a
thank
comment that she
you.
made. Yeah.
Thanks,
And
Tiffany.
you'll email me the brochures, right? And then I'll push them
Yes,
out to everybody in the company,
will do.
along with a
Absolutely.
recording of this. And the other question that I was going to ask is, it's always been a bit of a conundrum for me. I mean, I'm not actively listing and selling homes, but when I rarely had referrals for title companies. So it was always difficult for me to I always had friends that were in title, and they were like, don't you have any referrals for me? And I'd always be like, I don't, because it's the attorney handles it. It's like,
Most of the time.
right. So am I missing something, or like how do
No,
we,
that's
because you're not
exactly,
downstream from us, so it's hard for us to get your referrals.
well, that's actually something that I'm trying to change in the industry.
Uh-huh.
It's something that I want to shift. We've become very accustomed to having the attorneys handling everything. And I think that what's been lost in that is communication and customer service.
Right.
So what I would love to see is for agents to take control and form their team prior to. So I have
Mm.
a good handful of agents that once they have their accepted offer, they will put me on an email with their attorneys and say, here's my accepted offer. Please, be sure that contracts get sent to Yaritza so that she can
Mm.
order title. So they'll just put me in it already
Mm.
so that everyone knows who's who.
Mm.
I also think that another way that agents can develop a relationship with their title company is to ask for quotes. So if you tell your buyers or your sellers to request a quote from a title company, then for your buyers, they'll have a better picture of what their closing costs are going to be even before they sit down with their attorney.
Mm.
And for sellers, like I have a handful of people that contact me prior to them putting their house on the market because they want to know what they're working with. They want to be able to get ahead of clearing their items prior to getting it on the market. Now, the challenge with that is that you may have a buyer or buyer's attorney that says, well, I have my own title company and I don't want to use that person. It's not to their benefit if the search is already done, right? But
Mhm.
there are ways that you can control your transaction by getting ahead of it, or even when you give your clients the list of people that they can shop around for, adding the title company as one of those services.
Hmm. Okay, that makes sense. All right. Does anybody have any other questions? Oh, here we go.
You have a
Pip, you
hand
got your hand
raised.
raised. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
That was actually my question about being, and thank you so much, being able to have a seller pay in advance to run title. I mean, I had heard there's like an abbreviated cost, but approximately how much would that be? Like it can an individual then just come and say, this is my address, I want to run title, and
Yes.
whether or not they want to take it at the end. For example, I
Yes.
have
So
somebody now, they put in, I know that they put in an extra bathroom and they're gonna have, that's gonna come up, but, and I said, you've got to take care of that, but running the whole title search, I think would behoove people, wouldn't it? Really, in a way, but I'm always mystified by why it always comes right down to the week before you're trying to close and you're still waiting for everything. That it couldn't be
Exactly.
done in the beginning, but I guess some deals fall through and, there's a timing thing. Yeah.
It is more of the fact that a lot of the title services are done a la carte. So title attorneys don't want to initiate the service knowing that someone might have to pay if it doesn't go through, right? But what I tell my sellers is that if you do all of your initial searches and you're already ahead of the game, once you have your buyer, you can let them know, hey, I have my title already done. All we need to do is provide your information and we can update the report and get that over to you, your attorney, your lender, and cut time. So it's definitely something that I'm trying to set myself apart with. And in the industry in general, I think that it's important for sellers to take a little bit more of control to avoid delays. So it's not something that's standard or customary, but I think that it's something that's needed in the industry.
I guess it's just that because some attorneys work specifically with certain title companies and that's who
Exactly.
they just bring all their business to them. Because I've always felt like I didn't have too much choice in that matter,
And that's
unless
exactly
I tried
the
to run
opposite.
title.
Right. I mean, it's not law and it's really treated as if it's law because it's just been done for so many years, probably since the 1800s. This is the way that it's been done, but it's not law. It's not something that has to happen. And to answer your question, those searches, depending on the county, can vary between $300 and $500. And what I tell my sellers is that if it's something that you really want to get ahead of, that is the cost of it. But if you're able to ultimately have your buyer use it, then you don't have to pay for the cost. The buyer will ultimately pay it at closing.
I mean, it almost could be something, I don't know if this is, that as a listing agent, we could offer that as a possible benefit to the seller. Like, I'll cover your title search or something. Whatever.
Or like I tell some of my listing agents is that you can put that in your listing, title is already being cleared.
That would be a plus. Yeah.
So it's a shift. It's going to take a while, but I'm ready. I'm ready to.
Yeah. You got to start somewhere, right, Yaritza?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just want to tell you, somewhere. If we have time, what the second house that I sold was actually my late parents' house. And so I was new in the business. Well, I still learning every day, but I got a call 3 days before closing that there was a cloud on the title. I looked up at the sky. I said, what's a cloud? It's like, and my father had built a sunroom on the living room and never got a permit. And it came up.
Ironically, to look at clouds, right? Right, Pip?
Yeah. Well, I literally, I remember pulling over because I got this call. I had to take the call and I looked up at the sky. I was like,
what cloud?
Anyway, thank you so much for clarifying a lot. And I appreciate getting the brochures. I think that would be a good thing to go in our packet,
yes,
to help
definitely
elucidate what sellers and buyers need to do.
Definitely get that over to you. Thank you for your question. Right. I think Vicky has a
okay,
question.
Let me check here. Kathy Whitty, who is an associate broker down here in New Jersey, said that in Jersey, they can actually choose title in the contract, which is interesting. I didn't know that, but that's good to know.
That's good.
So
they actually should, the attorney should ask. It should be a question during the
totally agree, but they never do, because usually they even have their own title company or they have something worked out where they're getting a piece of the action, so I agree. It is one of these things that's just railroaded, Vicky, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question on the point where the seller would get their own title. I feel like, I'm just curious because when you do a bank-owned property, like a bank-owned deal, a lot of the times they'll say the seller or the bank will pay for the title if you use their title company.
Yes.
And I've had attorneys advise against using them on my own personal purchases when we bought bank-owned properties. So won't this be similar? Where you're having the seller pull title, but the buyer side is usually the one who runs title. So will your buyer's attorney frown upon relying on the seller's report?
Right.
They can.
It's like the seller doing their inspection, right?
Well, they can. However, the title company has an obligation to both parties of being the full disclosing party in the situation. So although it's the buyer that pays ultimately for the service, it's our responsibility to both the buyer and the seller to make sure that we're highlighting everything. And yes, a lot of buyers' attorneys will frown upon it, but it's mostly not because they feel that the title company has more of an interest to the buyer than the seller or vice versa. It's more for the reasons that Jeff highlighted, which is that there's already a relationship in place. They don't like diverting from their relationship with their title company, but they're not the ones getting the customer service. The title company is responsible for making sure that it's cleared regardless of who the transaction is with, what the parties, what the terms are. At the end of the day, we have to reduce the risks so that it doesn't become a claim for us.
Okay. And then if the seller is paying for the title report, they pay for the title report, but the buyer just pays for the insurance? They're two
Yes.
separate fees, right? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
But like I said, to bring more clarity upon it, if the seller does decide to initiate the report and then the buyer ultimately decides to go with another company, then yes, it would be the seller's responsibility to pay that company for that initial report, although the buyer's company is going to do the same initial reports and disclosures. So it would be to their benefit. I've had situations where like a deal fell through and then I would contact the seller's attorney and tell them like, hey, whenever you find your buyer, let them know like the title's already ready. I just need the updated name, and it worked out. So you can save time, save money.
I think, that the market that we're in right now is such a seller's market. There, you always know what type of market you're in by who the bigger pain in the butt is, right? The sellers are probably giving us a little more angst right now than buyers are because they have all the power, right? They have the inventory and there's none out there.
Right.
So they don't need many things to compel buyers to want to put offers on the property. So in a buyer's market, it might be a more worthwhile use of your time to convince the seller, hey, here's something you can do to make your property more competitive than another, is to get a title report going. I guess it can never hurt, but in the list of things that you need to be doing each day, I'm not so sure that that's high on the list. I think what's more important is educating your buyers that they have options, that they should think about title in terms of not just saying, okay, to one turn, like actually research a little bit, because think about it, your title insurance policy is really important and it's going to be there for a long, long time. And that relationship, if something comes up, it has nothing to do with the attorney. It has everything to do with the title company. So you better know damn well what title company you're going with. It's like car insurance, like you're not just going to go with, you don't like think about car insurance, right? Like everyone always selects it themselves and they probably research it and they get a couple different quotes and the whole thing. But like title insurance, a lot of people don't even know that they even paid for it because they're just signing documents and this is what it is. And I'm not paying cash out of pocket. The bank is bringing the money to the table. So whatever,
Right. Exactly.
But people need to be aware
too. Like you could it can be really expensive and you show up to the closing and you're like, wait, what? How much was that?
Right.
And you had no choice in paying and using your company. So I think the quote thing would be helpful too, just to suggest that. And just to tell our buyers, ask your attorney to show you what the title is going to cost if you use their company.
They should. And they should also request for a contact, because at least for me, I think that it's good for even you as a realtor or your buyer to have a direct contact to the title company. Why not? Like they're paying for the service.
And all of this information as a realtor, it just makes you more valuable to your client, knowing this information. And this is the reason why it's important to not just show up, but to pay attention, slap your face if you need to stay awake, because I know this is not the most compelling information, but you got to know it. You got to know what you're doing in this business. This is how you you know, show value in your services and what you do.
Yeah, it'll definitely
Okay.
set you apart.
Okay. Any other final questions, comments, or concerns by anyone? Going once, last chance, going twice, 3 times. All right, Yaritza, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank
I'm
you
so
so
glad we
much.
were able to connect and that Amy did it. So we know we're in a good place. So we'll follow up with everybody with a link to this recording so you can
And the
watch it again and
flyers.
again.
Yep.
And we will also follow up the brochures that Yaritza has. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yes. Thank you so much.
right.
Have a great one, everyone.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.